You can walk into any room and make it work. You say the right things. You read the energy. You adjust without thinking. A slightly different version of yourself for every different group, every different setting, every different person who needs something from you that the last one didn't. And from the outside, it looks like social skill, like adaptability, like you are one of those rare people who can fit anywhere. But you know the truth. Fitting in is not the same as belonging. And you have been fitting in your entire life without ever once feeling like you actually belong. Not with your family, where you always felt like the one who saw things differently. Not with your friends, where you are present and loved and still somehow watching from a slight distance. Not at work, not in your neighborhood, not in the groups that are supposed to feel like home. Everywhere you go, there is a version of you that shows up. And underneath that version, something quiet and unchanged that never quite finds its match. People don't see it. That's the loneliest part. You function too well for anyone to notice. You are liked, included, invited back. And you smile and participate and go home and sit in the specific silence of someone who has been surrounded by people all day and is still, somehow, completely alone. You are not broken. You are not too much or too little or permanently damaged. And you are not imagining it. What you are feeling has a name. And the psychology behind it goes deeper than loneliness, deeper than introversion, deeper than anything a simple label has ever managed to capture. Stay with me. Let's start with the group that felt this before they had words for it. You are 11 years old. There is a lunch table where your friends sit. You walk toward it every day and something in your chest tightens slightly before you arrive. Not because they are unkind. They are not. But because the conversation is already happening without you, and when you sit down you have to locate yourself inside it like finding a door in a wall that looks smooth from a distance. You laugh at the right moments. You contribute. Nobody notices anything is wrong because nothing visibly is wrong. But somewhere underneath the performance of belonging, a quiet part of you is watching, observing, feeling the gap between where you are sitting and where you actually live. You went home that day and could not explain to anyone what was wrong, because nothing was wrong. You were just somewhere that didn't quite fit. And you had been somewhere that didn't quite fit for as long as you could remember. That was not a social failure. That was the beginning of an identity that the available categories simply could not contain. Psychologist Kenneth Gergen at Swarthmore College spent decades studying what he called the saturated self, the experience of a person whose sense of identity is too complex, too multifaceted, too aware of its own contradictions to settle comfortably inside any single group or label. These are not people who lack identity. They have too much of it. They see themselves from too many angles simultaneously to fully commit to any single version. You do not belong anywhere not because you are incomplete, but because you contain more than any one place can hold. That is not an absence. That is an excess that the world has not yet built a container for. Now the second group. The ones who stopped belonging somewhere specific the moment they started growing. There was a place that used to feel like home, a group, a community, a version of your life where everything fit. And then something shifted, you changed, or they changed, or the world changed, and suddenly the place that used to hold you no longer could. And you have been looking for the next one ever since. Psychologist Abraham Maslow at Brandeis University identified belonging as one of the most fundamental human needs, sitting directly above physical safety in his hierarchy. When it is consistently unmet, the brain registers it not as social disappointment but as existential threat. The search for belonging that follows is not neediness. It is biology doing exactly what it was designed to do. But here is what Maslow also found. The people who never stop searching, who move through groups and communities and relationships looking for the place that finally fits, are often the ones whose sense of self has grown beyond what any single community can accommodate. They are not homeless. They are between homes. And there is a difference. That is not drifting. That is a self that has outgrown its previous containers and not yet found the next one. And the third group, the ones for whom not belonging was never a loss. It was a lesson taught early and permanently by the place that was supposed to be the first home. You grew up in a family where you were loved, maybe, but not understood. Where the person you actually were did not quite match the person the family needed you to be. Where your questions were too big or your feelings were too much or your way of seeing the world was quietly, consistently treated as something to be corrected rather than something to be known. And you learned, before you had any choice in the matter, that belonging required performance. That home was a place you had to earn entry to by being a version of yourself that fit the available space. Psychologist Carl Rogers at the University of Chicago called this conditions of worth, the early internalized belief that love and acceptance are conditional on which parts of yourself you present. When this lesson is learned young enough and consistently enough, it produces adults who move through the world feeling fundamentally unseen. Not because people don't care, but because the version of themselves they have learned to show is never quite the whole one. That is not being unknowable. That is never having been shown that the whole of you was safe to bring. But here is where we have to stop and be completely honest. Because everything described, the complex identity, the outgrown communities, the conditional belonging of early life, all of it is real. All of it explains something true about you. And yet, there is a difference between someone who doesn't belong anywhere because they are genuinely between places and someone who has decided, quietly and permanently, that belonging is something that happens to other people. Because sometimes not belonging becomes an identity, a story that feels true because it has been true for so long. A conclusion that was once earned from real experience but is now applied automatically to every new room before you have even walked in. Psychologist Carol Dweck at Stanford University found that the stories we tell about our fixed traits, "I have always been this way, this is just who I am," become self-fulfilling. The person who believes they will never belong stops doing the small, vulnerable things that belonging actually requires. So here is the question only you can answer. Is your not belonging a genuine state of being between places? Or has it become a protection, a way of never being fully in a room so you can never be fully asked to leave? Be honest, because one leads somewhere, and the other keeps you standing at the edge of every room for the rest of your life. Here is what the research shows that almost nobody talks about. Psychologist Brené Brown at the University of Houston found that true belonging, the deepest kind, never requires you to change who you are. In fact, she found that the people who experience the most genuine belonging are not the ones who fit most easily into groups. They are the ones who are most fully themselves inside them. Belonging, at its deepest level, is not about finding a group that accepts the performance. It is about being so grounded in yourself that you bring home with you wherever you go. You have been looking for a place that feels like you, but the research says the place has always been you. So here is your permission slip. You are not too complicated to be known. You are not permanently outside. You are not someone who slipped through the cracks of every community by accident or by flaw. You are someone whose depth of self has not yet found its equal, whose way of seeing the world is rare enough that the matching world is smaller and harder to find, who has spent years fitting in because belonging felt too risky to try for. That is not a life sentence. That is a starting point. You do not belong nowhere. You belong to the specific, quiet, extraordinary community of people who have never stopped asking the real questions, who have never been willing to belong somewhere that required them to be less, who would rather feel alone in a crowd than comfortable in a lie. That is not a consolation prize. That is the most honest kind of life there is. Drop a comment. Where is the one place or moment in your life where you came closest to feeling like you truly belonged? I read every single one. And if this felt like someone finally seeing the thing you have carried silently for years, subscribe. I make these every week for the people who have never quite found the room that fits. And if you have ever wondered why you feel most like yourself completely alone, why solitude feels more like home than most people ever have, that one is next. You were never someone who didn't belong anywhere. You were always someone the world hadn't.